You hear meeting recording in progress. And now I'm going to share the screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing happening up there. Nothing's happening up there.
Are we ready to go?
Yeah.
Nope.
There you go.
Looks good. Oh, okay. All right, welcome everybody. This is the March meeting of the Pownell Planning Board. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It is 6 o'clock on March 20th. Our first order of business, actually in advance of that, I just want to apologize to everyone who came to the February meeting and thank Todd for chairing in my stead. I had a calendar mishap and thought it was on Wednesday when it was in fact on Tuesday, so I apologize. Our first order of business is to approve the meeting minutes of the February meeting. I read through them, didn't see any flags, but I also wasn't there. So if anyone else had any comments or wants to make a motion to approve them.
I thought everything looked good. I'll make a motion to approve. Oh.
On page 3, Brian says, and I couldn't catch, like the third line down. Brian says, I think some structures in general. And I don't know what these are tied to the LD 2008. I can't remember them. I think we just strike that.
Strike the something missing.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor? All right, motion carries. All right, and the next order of business is, excuse me. The CMP application. I'm going to hand the floor over to Todd to handle this. I recuse from CMP matters because they are often a client of our firm. Step away.
So my understanding is that CMP would like to present to us. If you guys just want to take the floor and.
A short slide show for you folks. I think Marcy is bringing it up. So I'll make this pretty informal. If you have any questions along the way, please just stop me. For any questions you might have, it's going to be up on the screen here. Yeah. So this is the second slide, but tonight we're here to talk about CMP's section 64 re-rate and section 62 rebuild. Both of those transmission lines are existing here today in Pownell. Next slide. So we'll just do some quick introductions. We have Jerry Robley here with us tonight. Right here, he's the director of CMP permitting compliance. We also have Adam Marquis, who's the project manager for this project for CMP. We also have Lisa Gilbreth, who's Pierce Atwood serving as legal counsel for the project. We also have Nicholas Hahn, here with us tonight, serving as CMP's vegetation management personnel. Troy Thibodeau, who's with Burns McDonald, serving as the public involvement specialist, for Pownell and other local municipalities. And then myself, Sam, along with Burns McDonald on behalf of, CMP. Next slide, please. So as I was talking about a moment ago, the project we're here to talk about is the section 64 re-rate, section 62 rebuild of the existing transmission line corridor, transmission lines that are in the corridor here in Pownell. The project is considered an essential service by the town's zoning ordinance and shoreline zoning ordinance, and requires site plan approval and shoreline zoning approval from the planning board. We're also going to be looking for a special exception use approval by the planning board. The reason for that is the transmission line itself occurs entirely within the rural district here in Pownell, but it's considered an electric utility upgrade. It falls within the public utility facility definition in the ordinance. Next slide. So this right here on the right side is a map. I believe it's figure 2-1 in your manual. The project spans from Durham through Pownell to the existing Saroway substation for approximately 1.2 miles. It is located in an existing transmission line corridor next to section 3026. The project is going to be built entirely on land that's owned by CMP and Fee. And that corridor itself will not need to be widened to accommodate the project. There's not going to be any, tree clearing on the sides of the transmission line corridor to widen it. Next slide. So the project includes replacing 11 poles on section 62 and 5 poles on section 64. The approximate pole height of those replacement poles are 77 feet. The project crosses through the limited residential district with a wetland near Allen Road, and the project includes replacing 2 poles within the limited residential district, and then conducting maintenance to existing poles. And then the existing transmission line corridor itself traverses largely forested land with various agriculture. So on the right side of this slide here, you'll see what you call a cross section. It basically, I know it may be a little tough to see on this slide, but if you open up to Exhibit 5, what it'll show you is basically what you would see in a right of way if you're out there today, and then also what we're proposing. So I'll go over that with you real quick. So on the top, it's the existing. So what's out there today, we have section 62, which is on the left side. That is going to be rebuilt in a monopole configuration. Now, it exists in an H-frame configuration today, but it's going to be brought in closer to the center of the right-of-way. So it's actually going to be farther from the edge of the right-of-way. And then transmission line section 64, it's going to maintain its H-frame configuration, but it's going to be re-rated. Now, a re-rate is basically replacing the conductor so it can transmit more energy. With that comes an increase in temperature to the conductor itself, which actually increases the sag of the transmission line conductor. So to accommodate that, we're going to be replacing some poles and some hardwares to make sure that we're maintaining our clearance requirements. And then on the right side is section 3026, which is an existing transmission line that's not part of the project, but does occur in the transmission line. Any questions on that? So one pole that's a single pole, one pole that's a double pole, and one pole that is a triple pole will be installed in wetlands. I apologize, in your manual it says 77.5 square feet of wetland impacts in the result of this project. It's actually only 57.25. So I apologize about that. But as far as our design goes, we always try to decrease natural resource impacts to the maximum extent practical. When you have a transmission line corridor like this that goes in a straight line, it's pretty tough with your engineering constraints to do that. So 57.25 square feet represents a pretty good number. Obviously, you always want zero, but so in areas where access doesn't already exist in the right of way, we're going to be installing temporary access ways to access our work areas. Timber mats, which you may see sometimes on the highway, they're these they're basically like rectangular long logs that will be placed to span wetlands and streams to decrease natural resource impacts of those important natural resources. And then there's not going to be any in-stream work, meaning there's no holes in any streams. There's not going to be any supports for those, stream crossings. And then temporary access ways and temporary structure preparation areas, which are the actual areas surrounding the structures themselves, are going to be restored to pre-construction conditions. That may take a little bit for nature to kind of grow back as far as the vegetation out there, but I would say we don't see extremely similar to what you see out there today. And then construction is anticipated to begin in May of this year with a completion date targeting July. Next slide. So as far as approvals obtained for the project, the NPUC gave their certificate of public convenience and necessity in May of 2019. The NDEP issued their site law and NERPA permits in May of 2020, and then the United States Army Corps of Engineers issued their Rivers and Harbors Act Section 10, as well as their Clean Water Act Section 404 permits in November of 2020. We do have a few outstanding permits that we're working on. Here in the town of Pownell, we have street entrance, driveway, and building permits that we're going to be working on here soon within town once we finish up our permitting. And then we also do have a minor permit revision with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, United States Army Corps. That is a result of an ISO New England study, which ISO is basically the large corporation that manages the bulk energy supply of the grid up here. So there was some studies done, and in order to accommodate that, we made some changes to our design. The design that you're looking at here tonight is the exact same design that they're looking at, so there's no difference. And then lastly, no construction in Pownell will begin until the issuance of all necessary permits. So that means, the Army Corps, the themselves, and then the driveway. I guess that's all I have from my presentation as far as the slideshow. And then we do have the maps, and one after we go over those and kind of walk it right down. You'd like to hear if you have any questions. Yeah, I think it was in the PDF. No, I think I actually had it.
Just for context, can you tell us why 64 and 62 need work, and like why just this section and not the whole thing? Can you just give us that context?
Sure. I actually do have.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all driven by ISO.
Okay. Right.
Basically, increase the thermal capacity of those two lines.
Okay.
They were originally, as Sam was saying, they were originally supposed to both be rebuilt. But upon further analysis, we were able to accomplish what ISO was asking by re-rating that one.
Okay. So when you're doing this and you're looking like broadly, you're looking for those weak points where the line isn't rated to that higher. And this is one of those. Okay.
Yeah, those approvals, those were for NECC a few years ago,
Right.
when NECC was drastically different than what it is in Pownell right now, right? It was gonna be a StatCom and many other, lots of
Right.
other infrastructure.
Right.
And now it's drastically different. And a re-rate was not part of those approvals at all, correct?
Was a rebuild. And that's the minor revision application.
Right. Right.
So the answer is no, correct?
Correct, but it's, again, it's the design that's in front of that second bullet. There is a minor permit revision application that we have in front of DEP, the United States Army Corps.
And will we,
Back to the slide that has the three schematics.
Sure.
The middle of those three, on four. The middle of those three is what the scope was back in 2020. That's what was approved in the second of those two
yeah,
pages.
and you're proposing the third.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
That's
that's
what's changing in the second.
So in this notebook, there's a big section.
Yeah, I think, taking a look at the maps would be nice. If we could pull that up.
I'm seeing this, but so this is the first page. If you look at the top, I know it's probably pretty tough for a lot of people to see, but that top line represents structures or transmission line section 62. Those yellow dots, I was talking to some folks earlier today. I sent out a digital version. I apologize if your digital version didn't have those yellow dots. But I think they do in your manuals and then up here. What those are, basically the existing structure locations, those will be removed. And then the third line where you see section 62, that's our new proposed location for section 62. And you'll see there's kind of like a beige circle. Those are the new pole locations that we're proposing as part of that. And then the third one is section 64. And there's a little bit of difference on this because we're doing a re-rate. So there's some black poles, which mean they're existing poles that we're not going to be replacing. And then you have some red dots, which are basically poles that are going to receive some maintenance. That may be a guy wire, guy anchor, cross brace, stuff like that. And then if you see a beige circle that has a black dot in the middle, that's a pole replacement, but it's in the exact same location or, you know, I mean, the de minimis distance from the existing pole location. So as you can see, you know, we have some checkered orange lines here. Those represent our construction access ways. We've designed those to cross wetlands in areas where it's, you know, the most narrowest part. So where, you know, the temporary impact is to the, you know, least extent practical. So I think that kind of does it on this slide. Does anybody have questions on this slide?
No.
All right. Move on to the second one. I think you can scroll down. That's slide. I think we got to go back one. And then so we're continuing down the right of way here. Again, I'm not going to rehash everything, but it's the existing 62 to the rebuilt 62 to the re-rated 64. We're continuing to, you know, ensure that we're decreasing our natural impacts as much as possible as far as our temporary access ways. I'm trying to figure out if there's any. Anybody have any questions? Ready? And I don't know if I missed this, or the one on the bottom is 3026, and that's not part of the project. And then so this is Fickett Road and Allen Road. This is where limited residential district is with that wetland. So the reason why that's a limited residential district is the definition of a wetland triggers limited residential district, and that's 10 contiguous acres for a wetland, which this one meets. So that creates a buffer off of it. So we do have a few poles located both in the limited residential district in the wetland. You know, we tried to design the project to, decrease natural impacts to the maximum practical, but in some cases that's just not possible. So it continues and then goes into Sarwick substation, which is the existing Sarwick substation that's out there today. If you do see Thicket Road substation listed on here and on the final slide, it's also part of the project, but it's not something we're permitting here tonight. We don't really have a timeline on when we're looking to permit that. More than happy to answer any questions along the way. I guess I'll turn my seat.
Yep.
I have to tell you that I know last time. Well, I came over and talked about the project. The only citizen on the herbicide, well, herbicide people, it seems like it's very localized.
Yeah.
Individual plants.
Yeah, did you want to make a couple comments, Nick, or?
Yep, yeah, it is selective. The last treatment cycle was in 2022. And it's essentially just a spot application. So we're trying to control any growth that has the potential to grow over 10 feet of maturity. So hardwood, softwoods, your herbaceous plants and shrubs, ferns, all those other sorts of low growth or
Citizens having here is confused.
So I think as a planning board with this sort of project, I'd like to defer a little bit to our town planner and to North Star as far as what their thoughts are on this project. I think primarily we're concerned with the waivers that they're asking for. Did you guys have any concerns that we're not thinking about at this point? Yeah, for sure.
I'll start. Sam, you can jump in anytime you wish. Evening, Tom Ursha, Town Planner at Pownell. Regarding the waivers, they're both of the two waivers, and I think I put that in my memorandum to the board and to the town. They're very reasonable requests. When we're working with map scales, for example, we set an arbitrary number because we're usually working at a much smaller scale, a couple acres. So 1 to 50 works, 1 inch to 50 feet. The request by the applicant is very fair and reasonable, as is the second waiver. There is one thing that the board in your conversations may wish to discuss, and it's one of the criterion in site plan review that says that you may request to have a public hearing. The applicant has prepared all of the abutters, the addresses, all the envelopes are sitting over there should you elect to proceed with a public hearing. But the actual wording in site plan review is may have. Conversely, it is a compound sentence. It states that you must have a site inspection unless you decide to waive that site inspection based on the fact that of the thoroughness and the detailedness of the application. I myself have gone through it 3 times. Sam?
God bless.
Sam, you owe me a beer and a steak on this one, jeez. It's quite voluminous and extremely thorough, extremely thorough. And I find no major environmental impacts that would result from this. A lot of common good will result because of the energy benefits on both on the rebuild and the remake. So those are my only comments, but I think the board should make a decision as to whether or not to have a public hearing, your choice, may, and how you'd like to handle the site inspection, which also can be waived if it's a vote of the board. Any questions of me?
No, thank you, Tom. That's.
I've got a
Go
comment.
ahead, Bill.
I've got a comment on that too. So first waiver to me seems reasonable for a presentation to go to 251 rather than 50 to 1. But the second waiver request is regarding property lines.
Mhm.
And it references using the same 50 to 1, 250 to 1 diagram, which obviously is great for a presentation, but it's not really good for actually seeing where these lines are.
Mhm.
And are we being asked to actually not have CMP verify where the property lines are?
No, all the lines are in fact verified. We do have printed copies too, which I've brought. I was hoping to display them so you could see the whole stretch or that whole area of impact. But we've been mandated by the town not to put any pins in these acoustical tiles behind you. But I think, Sam, would you like to address that?
Yeah, sure. So basically, like, 50 to 1 as far as a scale, might work better for, your traditional applications, but the scale on these maps are very typical as far as the transmission line corridor. It's kind of an atypical project. But as far as, the second waiver go, it's more so, the requirement would have to show the entirety of the transmission line corridor in Pownell, which doesn't even include the project. So it's not really necessary to show, it's a large portion of it that, we're not really concerned.
Although
with.
75% of it does transit, the project transits, over a mile and a half, about a mile and a half of the entire property line, correct? Right down the center of
Right,
those
and
property
we-
lines.
What we're saying is we're asking for relief for areas where the project is not, located, but we've, clearly depicted it in Exhibit 4. Does that make sense?
So as far as the property lines, you do know exactly where they are.
No, the property lines are on, yeah, absolutely. So I think we're to meet you halfway. So what the ordinance is asking is basically for outside of our project footprint, basically we would be showing a map and there would be nothing for what we're concerned with here. It's just showing the entirety of CMP's property, not necessarily where our project is. Now, the project maps that you see show the property lines there. It would be a lot more than we really need, I guess.
Okay. And those are accurate property lines.
Yeah, it's a,
Okay.
the ordinance asks for a boundary survey, right? So you got your parcel boundary survey. And that was done when CMP purchased our property decades ago. So the boundaries are existent, and then there's an exhibit that has all supporting the boundaries that are mapped. And what Sam's point is so it asks for a boundary survey of the whole corridor, and the project itself is well within the corridor. So the waiver is not only is the boundary survey necessary because it's protected and all the deeds are in there and the things are already done. It's very long time ago. But the project doesn't have a boundary. It's within.
Yep. Yeah, I see it's right, pretty much in the center. Shouldn't interfere, I wouldn't think.
Yeah,
Okay.
so the risk of project.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Sam, did you have anything to add?
I actually haven't seen the project.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions or concerns at this point?
I just wanted to say that I don't have a problem with either of the waivers and approving them tonight. The public hearing, again, it seems like such a minor project, but is it important for people when they see all this work going on, would they want to have known about it in advance? I guess that's the only question I have is a public hearing important?
Just that, I mean, we do have public outreach today. Troy's here, but we'll be sending letters out ahead of the construction. We'll make sure that, you know, we do outreach to make sure that everybody's informed as far as the butter, so there's not gonna be any surprises. So just to make sure that, you know, we'll be, you know, constant contact with our neighbors.
I think that's a good idea. I mean, the problem with a public hearing is nobody comes anyway, so that's not gonna be of any value if you guys are actually outreaching to the abutters. I think that's probably far more productive way to spend time than to actually hold a public hearing. I would kind of say the same thing for a site visit. I don't think that any of us need to climb out there and look at the site. I don't think anything would change from our perspective as a board if we went and looked at the site personally. So I think we could add, Tom, we would have to add that as a waiver to their application. Is that what you're saying? Yes, please.
On that particular point, you probably want to make it clear for the record. So that if we get phone calls into town hall, we'll be, both the code officer and I will be able to be responsive. I would suggest if the board is contemplating both the waivers, if you have any conditions of approval, one might be to address when the outreach is to happen, in case we get phone calls. There might be some activity out there and we'd like to be responsive. And also if at a different level of government, Corps of Engineers and DEP, if it doesn't fulfill the May deadline, then the outreach dates might be different. So some sort of cross communication between the applicant and town hall, I think would be really beneficial. Okay. The waivers, again, each should be voted on. I would suggest you vote on them both individually.
Speaking about the application itself, I did kind of glance through this, and there was one section, and I think you mentioned it, Sam, where there's with the change in the permit, it may delay, like we're voting on something today, but because of the change in the proposal, you're still waiting on some other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And consider doing a condition of approval that we get all the project permits that are necessary prior to construction.
I believe that's already in the ordinance. I mean, CMP cannot build it until it gets all of its permits.
Right.
But I believe there's an ordinance provision already says that no construction can begin until they're granted.
Okay.
There is one other point that might be helpful, basically for public clarity. And it usually comes up in applications of this sort. There's a component, there's an exhibit that speaks to blasting. It might be helpful to have Mr. Rice just speak to the board so they'll have some sense of the blasting. There is some pole relocation. Sam, I don't know if it's an area of bedrock or, so if you could speak to the scope of blasting.
Yeah, we included we included blasting in our application because your ordinance mentions it. It's pretty unlikely that we're going to require blasting. It's only required in certain areas where there's, you know, a high level of bedrock to accommodate our pole placements, but it's not something we do, I would say, regularly. Is that correct, Jerry, as far as the project goes?
Add them on, you know, site specific.
Yeah, and as far as, you know, our blastings and protocols, that's actually part of the MDEP application. So we have an exhibit included in our application. I believe it is, it's exhibit 10. So I included that just for, you know, to make it so you didn't have to climb through exhibit 2, which is huge. So it just outlines what we're going to be doing if we encounter blasting, but we're not really anticipating it's going to be necessary.
And when were, to Tom's point, when were you planning on reaching out to the abutters ahead of the construction?
I think it's, waiting on permits actually, I think before those will officially will go out. And typically what I've been doing is, getting in touch with folks like yourselves, or select boards, and town planners. You'll have my cell phone, and then, dealing with the butters, so they call me direct, or like that, to answer the question earlier about, how to get in touch with us and that sort of thing. And that seems to be gone very well, smooth, but as far as notifying the butters, we hold off until, we have all the approved permits, and that's because, we'll have a better timeline on when we will be starting, because obviously it's.
Right. And also, to add to that, don't really want to be presumptuous, right? We don't want to, put the cart before the horse as far as an approval, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Tom, our town planner, mentioned the possible conditions of approval. Now, in our comprehensive plan, we mentioned 7 times the use of herbicides, specifically also in the CMP corridor. Would it be proactive to request the CMP not use herbicides in our section of the corridor? Some towns have banned or prohibited or very restricted the use of herbicides. Would now be a time to request that as a condition of approval? Or at least add it to the letters that are being sent out to the 12 abutters?
I don't see how you can have a power line and have trees grow up and so you have to do something to maintain the vegetation at a level that doesn't affect the power line.
I'm sure it's done in other towns. I don't know the details on how it's, I assume use a one of those chipper on the end of a, like we do on our sides of our roads. Yeah.
So there are a lot of advantages to using the selective use of herbicides in that, if you get into brush mowing and that sort of thing, you get all that coppicing or resprouting that'll come back. You're not controlling the root systems of those plants. So you kind of get a dense thicket over time, and you end up going on shorter and shorter cycles to maintain that growth. The other thing to keep in mind too is the use of herbicides, the selective use of herbicides is something that's a best practice. It's the ANCA 300, Part 7, TBMP type best management practice. And with the mowing, you kind of get like a monoculture, so to speak. You're starting over. Whereas when you allow, shrubs and other plants that are compatible to continue to grow, then there's a lot more structure for different species of songbirds and that sort of thing. So it really, there are a lot of pros and cons. I think it's a discussion.
And how high must a tree be to the point where you have to cut it? Is it 10 feet, 15, 20 feet, or?
So part of it is what's considered, we manage the wire zone and then a border zone. So there's a little bit more flexibility off the edges as far as height with the compatible species. But if it's an incompatible species, your hardwoods and your softwoods, we try to eliminate those every 4 years because over time, obviously, removing larger tree, there's a lot of public safety concerns as they grow up towards the conductors and clearances that you have to maintain, but also the cost is considerably more as the trees get larger. So it's not, it's all species dependent, so to speak.
Specifically rated to buckthorn, which will reach 10 to 15 feet. Will that have to be, herbicides have to be used on that?
Yes, if it gets over 10 feet in the wire zone area, or if it's around structures, guy wires, equipment, switches, that sort of thing, then it is hand cut. It's over 8 feet or so, it gets hand cut. And we do some treatments as well.
mainly controlling buckthorn is gonna take a lot of chemicals. So there's a good chance that whole area will be all buckthorn at some point because it won't be logged anymore.
Yeah, actually, we're in the process of doing some test plots, and doing some reseeding and some overseeding, so to speak, actually in Gorham, near the Gorham Park and Ride. Where we've mowed a small area and, we're trying to see what the best method to kind of keep the invasives from coming back. But it is very difficult once buckthorn, autumn olive, multiflora rose, knotweed, those sorts of things start to come into the corridor and are spread around. So, again, having that in your toolbox, when you start getting into invasive control, usually systemic herbicide is something that even the state will recommend. So to kind of take that out of the toolbox isn't always a prudent thing.
Certainly, it would be more expensive
Yeah.
than herbicides. But if the town in the comprehensive plan 7 times has mentioned that they are interested in limiting or restricting the use of herbicides, especially in the quarter, should we consider that?
Well, I mean, I appreciate the idea of that, but I would have to say that's probably beyond. I have no specialty in herbicides and I don't think maybe I don't know how the planning board would be able to tell CMP how best to manage it. So they're using herbicides, but we don't know what the effect of the alternatives are. And that's a problem we always have to think about, is if we take that tool, not that we could anyway, but if we take that tool away from them, what's the outcome of their other options? Is that even worse than herbicides? And I don't see how we're in a position to even debate that topic.
We don't have to be experts, but we should be asking the town.
I will add that the products that we use are all registered for pesticide control. They're all registered with EPA, and the applicators are all licensed.
As was DDT.
To address part of your concern, which seems to be invasives. Increasing invasives. The land use in the corridor won't change prior to and after this re-rate and rebuild, but there is a requirement in the DEP approval for the project that we survey all of the areas of the project pre-construction and identify all the invasives by species, by percent cover, and that we do a follow-up survey post-construction to see if the abundance or the areas of occurrence of those have changed and increased, and treat back to at least what it was prior to construction. So we don't typically expect that there will be an increase in invasive prevalence. I mean, if there is buckthorn now, European buckthorn, it may increase on its own as a result of construction or not, but our responsibility is to make certain that the construction does not cause an increase in invasives.
Anybody else have on that idea?
To say one more thing, because I remember the dialogue during the previous presentation and also the comprehensive plan. And I think for us to even, as a town, tackle that question, I mean, I think very few people understand the current plan that's in here, what's being done and what could be done. And I mean, that's a huge question. I think is beyond the scope of what we're trying to do tonight.
Yeah.
Although dozens of towns, just go to the main site and they'll show you all the different towns that have implemented a plan already. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, so that could, certainly that could be implemented and the town could do something like that. I think the select board could make a decision about that. But I think our role is, do we approve this project as a planning board, as a site review I'm not prepared to make any comment about how they're managing or maintaining the corridors.
Mainly Tom had brought up a condition of approval. And I thought that maybe that would be a way that we could get
Right.
them to limit the. or-
Bill, I totally appreciate your comment because I definitely have concerns about herbicides as well. But in terms of the issue before us and the larger issue of herbicides in the town, we don't have an ordinance or a directive, and all we have is minimize and think about it. And I think your discussion right now is thinking about it. I also did appreciate the comments in the many pages that you submitted to us that actually went through you're doing this with a sprayer on somebody's feet and you're only doing those particular, this is not being dropped from the sky. So that kind of thing, I think we're doing our due diligence in at least thinking about this with the town. I would like to know if it's water soluble. But I think that it's a great thing, but I think it's something for the town to tackle as an issue. We can't push that issue into this particular application.
Okay, I think if there's nothing else, I think, we can go ahead and start talking about the waivers. Can you just?
So does anybody have any objection to my just pitching in on procedure here? I assume not. So your first step, I think, will be to take a vote on approval of the waivers. I think there's already been a discussion on that, so I think you're right for a vote. Anyone can begin by proposing a motion. I think there have been a few conditions of I'm sorry, there are 4 waivers, I think, on the floor. The 2 are the map waivers that have been discussed. And then there's also 2 procedural pieces. One is the question of whether a public hearing is required. I think that's not a waiver, it's just a vote, and you guys can vote whether or not you want to have the public hearing. Sounded to me, well, yeah. And then there's a question of whether you want to waive the requirement for a site walk. And then I think that you're asking that a vote be taken on the application tonight, is that right?
If possible, that'd be great.
Thank you.
And can you direct me to the page that the waivers are on so I could actually read those?
Attachment, we list them at attachment 1 of the cover letter.
Okay.
It's gonna be very close to the beginning.
So the first waiver is for the map scale to change from 50 feet to the inch to 200 feet to the inch. Does anybody have any comment on that waiver?
I think Sam addressed. right?
Yes. it's too
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, that's.
Yeah, I.
Oh, okay.
I apologize. I talked to Tom about that. It's actually 250.
Okay, 250.
I move that we allow the waiver to change the scale to 1 inch equals 250 feet instead of 1 inch equals 50.
Nice. All in favor? Motion passes. The second waiver is regarding the boundaries of all contiguous property under the control of the owner, the applicant, regardless of whether all or part is being developed at this time. Does anybody have any comment about the second waiver? No?
So I move that waive the requirement to depict the entire extent of CMP's transmission lines. Requirement to depict contiguous property boundaries on the entire extent of CMP's transmission.
I second. All in favor? Motion, the motion passes. So
The sidewalk,
the,
whether you're.
and
Whether
the
the-
public hearing, so with the site walk, does anybody have feel a need to walk the site?
I move that we not
I second. All in favor? Motion passes. And then it was, public hearing. Any comment about public hearing?
That we not.
Second that. All in favor? Lastly, I guess we put the project up to a vote. Right. So the vote will be for or against the project, pending approval, all approval. Yeah, securing all permits. So, can you word that for me?
Transmission project. Application with the condition that outstanding permits. Want to say anything else about public outreach?
Second. All in favor? So, that's it.
You all have anything else for the board?
Yeah, if I could, yeah, and I'm sure, not necessarily right now, but if Tom could email that or you yourself.
Ordinarily, they're findings.
Would you prefer that we vote on the findings of fact? Is that-
If we're going belt and suspenders,
Okay.
that would be great. I need to keep everyone here, but the bidders and leaders. Okay. For each criteria.
Do we have a page?
First is section 600 performance standards. That is the
5-1, or no, sorry.
well, I guess the special exception use approval is 2-2. That's I think that's an approval that is wrapped up in but you want to go through the special exception use, and then the performance standards, site plan review, shoreland, those are the ones that have.
That's majority.
Like 3-1 is the special. That references section 207 of the ordinance.
Three dash.
Sam, did you work up any of this? No. Yeah.
You can go through the actual ordinance. So does anybody have the ordinance with us? The land use ordinance?
You reviewed all of this.
Here's my suggestion for tonight, okay? It's fairly clear by the presentation what the expectations are. You've granted your waivers. You've looked at any possibilities for conditions. If you're going to go into any findings of fact, I'd suggest you table the vote this evening. It's the only proper thing to do. It would not be wise to rush. If you have an alternative to it, I can't think of one. I think you would really need to table it this evening and then have to bring it to a vote at a later time when those findings of fact were presented and documented. I'd suggest that the legal firm that brought it up send documentation to the town, and give citations on each one of those. And then the town can be responsive.
Yeah, I'm happy
Okay.
to do that if that's what the board would like. You know, so we would keep the approval vote of tonight. I would draft you applicant proposed findings and you would vote on those at a later date.
Right.
If that works.
They are in essence, but I think what Lisa's asking for is something more definitive in writing from the town as a form of our documentation to you.
Yeah, again, it's belt and suspenders because you voted tonight. But maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but
Sure.
I believe my client would prefer that we have our approval tonight. We draft up findings of fact for you all, we review those and approve them at a later date. That.
Given the request, it's a fair request, both parties benefit. Given that legal counsel has suggested that, wisdom would dictate that you, I would advise that you table and bring it up at your next meeting.
Appreciate that. Okay. And so we will bring this up. So you'll have that for us. All right, cool. And we'll table this to the next meeting. And I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Matt.
All right, thank you. Thank you all.
You get the easy part.
I have
Yeah,
a,
exactly.
I have a question that CMP doesn't have to answer, but I figure we're talking solar farms today and we have an expert on transmission line. I just had a question about large solar farms. Are they usually built near substations like we have in Pownell, or are they built in other places? Or you don't have to answer. I'm just interested from your perspective.
I'll tackle it. I mean, solar projects are proposed by those who have property rights in the area where they're proposed. Where they can secure the property rights is where they're proposed. It's a benefit to be near a substation potentially. If they can get the property rights to that, because that would reduce the need for a transmission line to get to the substation, but proposed all over.
I've heard that, there can be a wait for bringing projects online, and part of that is due to potentially not ideal siting of them. Is there a process where when someone comes up with a solar farm site that they actually talk to the transmission line about where, if it's actually an ideal site to put a solar farm?
So this is a little bit beyond my area
Yeah.
of knowledge, but I'll tell you what I understand. That there is a significant queue of projects that go before the interconnection department at Central Power Company. And the studies that are done are to evaluate what needs to be done for infrastructure improvements to accommodate the additional generation. There's a component of location that depends upon the existing infrastructure in that area. But there's a backlog of projects that need to be evaluated individually, and then the improvements needed to accommodate, to incorporate that new generation need to be considered and funded typically by the, I believe, by the proponents of the project.
So do they put into that queue before they come to a town, or is that after they come to a town typically?
Lots to chew on with the solar farms. Yeah. All right, well, thank you all. We appreciate your time. Right. Okay, any particular reason? Is there anything you're looking to like emphasize, prioritize, or?
Well, the floodplain is enough.
Yes, definitely.
Other than that, they're in the order as what they should be.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. Yeah. All right. So the next item is the floodplain ordinance. So Tom, thank you for your extensive work on this, and both in drafting the ordinance and apparently there was a lot of getting other ducks in a row for it and still in process. So
Can,
I've read through, I assume everyone has, but I'd invite you to sort of give a summary if you'd like, or sort of guide us on what you think the next steps would be.
can
The
we?
summary would bring us to midnight, and I know one of our select board members see that look he's given me. Most of it's very self-explanatory. And it's, a lot of this preparation comes from the feds. We did run into a time crisis. I'd like to speak about timelines first. We were mandated to have a remedy to our old ordinance and old maps by June 20th. The town administrator and select board have moved, correct me if I'm wrong, John, the town meeting up to, pardon me, the 17th of June. That'll avoid any suspension of insurance, which was a point that the chair of the planning board brought up at the last meeting. So we've remedied that. Everything has been thoroughly gone through. All of the nomenclature is approved by the state and the feds. There were a couple very small language changes that were affected by legalese, not affected by content or the context of it, but just so it would be worded properly. The map work is now in digital format. Marcia's secured that. We do have the actual new panels, only one set, and that set will be in the code enforcement office. That set sitting on that bench, if anybody did want to take a look at them, but we do have one updated hard copy set of those panels. I believe everything's in order, and it needs the formalization of a planning board vote. It also needs a public hearing. My suggestion would be for efficiency, that they're subject to the approval of the select board, that there be a joint public hearing versus two individual hearings. And that's all I have. Any questions you have? It's pretty cut and dry.
I tend to agree. There's only one public hearing. Well, a joint public hearing makes more sense than two separate public hearings. John, do you have any objection to that? Okay. I had a couple of,
Good question. Can we invite Tom to sit up here with us? Since he's kind of.
yeah, that's
part of this
a
staff,
very
instead of
good.
having to come up and back.
Yeah, Tom, anytime you want to join and be up here, it may be easier than, you might get your steps in by getting up to the microphone every now and then, but. Yeah.
In the future.
Okay. I had a couple of very minor questions on the ordinance. Actually, really only one. One is moot effectively. I'm in section, Article 5, F sub 1. Following review of the elevation certificate data, which shall take place within 72 hours of receipt of the application, the CEO shall issue part 2 of the flood hazard development plan. I just don't know how big of a review that is, but it seems like a pretty hurried time frame for our CEO. Is that part of the, is that just part of this standard ordinance? And is there any, Ginny, do you have concerns with that timing?
Thank you, Jenny. Your reference again, Matt?
Sorry, Article 5, so this is page 5,
Okay,
F sub 1,
okay,
sort of the third line up from the bottom there. So you get the elevation certificate data in. And you've got to review that within 72 hours of of receipt of the application. So that's a pretty quick turnaround. Usually we're thinking about a month.
yeah, it's quick turnaround. However, Jenny can do that with her eyes closed.
Okay.
The reason being is that when the certificate comes in, it's going to be done by a PE. It has to be done by a PE that's going to set those elevations. And it's more of a certificate and a form of documentation. So, and then just cross-referencing it to the plan.
Okay,
Yeah, so, shouldn't take more than 5 minutes.
okay. It was just
Particularly for
curious
collaborating.
more than anything, and I wanted to make sure to,
Yeah, It's more a small procedural thing. It'd be different if we had to go out and ask a civil to go out and prepare it, get the proper elevations, but it's gonna come with a certificate signed and sealed.
Any other questions on the ordinance itself?
I wanted to say that I have been working with Becky to get the new maps up on the website. Just a challenge, but I would like to see us have the tax maps with a new floodplain layer over it in for the public hearing, which I know would cost money, but I think I have the old floodplain map and there's little dots where everybody's house is, which I think we're beyond that now.
Oh, no, can we do it again?
So I don't know whether that would be something for North Star or Spatial Alternatives does for tax maps, but
Again, with today's technology, real easy to do, probably not an assignment for North Star, but more of an assignment for those that have the extremely high tech capacity to do those overlays. And this just might be one of a series of convenient overlays so that when people come in to look at the tax maps, they can, of course, to scale. And that's one of the dilemmas. Sometimes the error occurs with a tax map. So sometimes you can have an overlay done to thousandths to an inch. But if the tax maps aren't registered extremely accurately, and we do have some inaccuracies that we hopefully will work out this year with the financial support of the select board to remedy some of those inaccuracies. So in order to overlay, you've got to have your base map perfect. Okay. The answer is no. Well, I think that's, it's a great planning tool. It's not necessary to have it as part of this approval. But more, maybe a vote of confidence from the select board that will be an endeavor that we'll take on, so we'll have it in the future. Yeah, but again, I believe we're working on the tax maps right now to fix. So, thank you, John. In other words, once we get the base map fixed, then we'll start to be thinking about a series of overlays, this being the first one to tackle. Mr. Chair, any other questions on that section?
No other questions from me on the ordinance. Anyone else? Otherwise, we would move forward to a vote to,
Just one question. Who wrote this? Did you say?
I think that Tom wrote this and it's based on a model ordinance.
Great job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tom, I don't know if you heard that. More plaudits for the drafting here. Thank you again.
Between the C and P one and this, I was having nightmares. No, it's just a lot of reading. Those that are accustomed to reading all that material, but it's there's such great tools. That flood insurance program is so important. So thank you. All the pieces came together, and I found that the state and the federal parties were very helpful. Very helpful.
Excellent. All right. There's no further questions or comments. I would move that we approve and move forward with move forward to the special or to the town meeting, excuse me. As drafted, the floodplain management ordinance for the town of Pownell, Maine that's been presented to us tonight. All right, all in favor? All right, the motion carries. Excuse me, to a public hearing. Would you like us to? Clarify that. Okay. In case that didn't get caught on the mic, Select Board Chair Morris observed that the motion is appropriately to just move forward to a public hearing with this. Yeah. All right, our next item is the food truck ordinance. Tom, we're gonna put you back to work. Can you give some context on sort of how this came about and just general thoughts on, it looks pretty limited and not extensive regulation, but tell us about it.
It's one page. Attorneys don't like to see one page. So you probably got the jitters when you saw it.
Critical.
No, I just.
I appreciated it.
How it came about is kind of twofold. At your last planning board meeting, we talked about everything. Sam brought up some solar farms and Ginny brought up some definitions, and I tried to think of things I could do on my drive home. And I made a comment to the board that this is so easy to prepare. I'll do it on the drive home. So one night on the drive home, I started thinking about this particular proposal. But to add context to it, is it a crisis-oriented ordinance? No. Is it anticipatory planning? Yes. Does it dovetail into a hopeful farmer's market sometime in the future? Yes. Fourthly, more and more restaurant establishments, which are the highest risk business that exist in America, is restaurants. Retail costs have gotten so high per square foot, triple net, that more and more either upstarts or existing businesses are looking towards food trucks. They're compatible with farmers markets so that when people go to a farmer's market, they can have an experience. It might be some craftspeople. It might be one food truck and a series of farmers. So it's anticipatory planning. It's not crisis-centered and it's simple. And it would provide an opportunity that if one or more pop up, that our code enforcement officer has some regulation to refer to. It might also avoid, if we want to speak about crises, just trucks coming in at willy-nilly. So it's good to, I think, to have something like this and anticipate what a trend is happening. That trend happened in Portland about 4 years ago, where everybody was going off of the commercial street and heading over to the Cove. So it's just something to look at. It's pretty easy to review.
Is the vision that this would go forward to town meeting in June, or do you think there's a broader discussion that needs to happen around this?
It depends on how progressive the board in the town wants to be. You'll find that occasionally I'll have an idea or creation, and I have to pass it on to the proper authorities to review. Things take time. Will there be a farmer's market this year? I don't know. It's in the hands of the Economic Development and Sustainability Committee. We have approached a couple dozen farmers to see if there would be an interest. There is a potentiality. The flip side of it is these types of things need coordination. So it needs some sort of an overseer to make it happen and make it happen properly. So my crystal ball can't tell you tonight if there will or will not. This is just one more piece of probably making a farmer's market ultimately, if that's the town's desire, happen. And in this case, with a little bit of regulation, food trucks should be regulated. That would be my recommendation to you.
We had a food truck that was probably, I think it might have been just on Fridays or something. It was locally sourced. When Edna and Lucy's left, there was the food truck that came in for a while. Do other folks have thoughts on this? We can sort of have a bigger discussion about this at other meetings, or we can sort of try to tackle it tonight. I don't want to talk too extensively about it tonight because we have so many different items. But if folks have initial reactions, then open it up.
I just had a couple questions. One regarding that. You talked about having a food truck license issued by the code enforcement officer. What would that license look like? Is it, I mean,
Oh, no, we haven't created it yet.
so I mean, and we would want to know what exactly that would mean.
Yeah, what are the criteria?
And
The criterion would be, I'll think out loud. Ginny, you jump in if, things such as if it's part of a farmer's market, typically they're on the peripheral edge. And typically a coordinator of a farmer's market gives the position. Secondly, that there's not an abuse of trash.
Yeah.
So everybody's throwing their paper in the town office parking lot. So that's why there's mention of trash receptacles. So it's just sort of, Ginny becomes sort of the sheriff, if you will, on that certificate. And it's just some basic things, lighting that's on it.
my other question was about kind of the hours of operations. And so in part A, it talks about food trucks being open for business during the same business hours of a host operation. So to me, that makes sense in that if Bradbury Mountain or there was something happening at the school and there's some event or some sports event or whatnot, maybe someone would want to have a food truck there, and it would make sense that they're there during that. And if that event is approved by the town, then there's recognition that there's going to be noise and people and it won't be a disturbance. So if we have that kind of limitation already in the ordinance, why limit it that it can only be Friday and Saturday or Sunday? There could be a Monday that is a school day off, or there could be an event on another day. And if it's an event that's already approved by the town, then why not? Why would we limit the food trucks?
The answer to that question, I had just left a select board meeting. My head was spinning and I was just threw out some
Yeah.
times on it.
Yeah.
The times are, they can be remedied. The purpose of I should have put first draft on it because there's things that we can fine tune. There might be more conditions that you want to add to it, but it gave us a first cut, a starting point. And if, and I haven't had the opportunity on Monday, I'll briefly talk about this with the select board, see if they fancy the idea. Again, it's not a crisis, but it's something to think about. It's the first cut.
No, I like the idea of putting some guardrails and saying, if you bring a food truck into town, we want to know it, and ideally it's part of a larger event that's already approved. And so just, there's some potential minor tweaks of, well, what actually is the permit look like, and the limit of hours, and also just that idea of, we talk about one food truck at a given time except at a farmer's market. It's like, well, why are we, maybe that's not fair to say the farmer markets have 3 food trucks, but Bradbury Mountain or the school can only have 1 food truck. And so there's just some minor tweaks around that.
Yeah, I think, I think we ought to have a more extensive discussion around those kinds of topics. And
Based on what I hear, why don't we put this to the side? When you have a lull, we can bring it back. I did forget one component of it, that we need to have some preferential treatment for those that offer smoked salmon from Brown's Trading on fresh bagels to expedite the process. Get that? Okay. All righty. Anything else?
Fancy tasting.
Yeah. Oh, I picked that up from my wife.
One more question. Does Bradbury have a food truck at this moment? Or, because they're still on town land, right?
I don't know. Do you know, John? Jenny, do you know? If they do?
Sorry, Ginny.
So what I'm going to say to that fact is that the town had a food truck for our community day or for the Oktoberfest. I don't see how we can technically tell somebody else at this time that they couldn't have a food truck for their event. So the fact that Tom is bringing this up for an ordinance is probably very vital.
Was locally sourced, were they told, did they just, does anyone know what, were they told they had to leave, they couldn't be there?
I don't know anything about it. I just know that they were at the Edna and Lucy's spot, which is maybe a coincidence, maybe that they like used that license. I have no idea.
So locally sourced was a pop-up and they were not regulated and caused the town a little bit of trouble because of that, because they could do whatever they want because they don't have an ordinance. So rather than be reactive, is being proactive so that don't want to discourage it, but want to be able to have some kind of handle because something that happened in the town would have been liable.
So as far as like, if there was a food poisoning outbreak or something like that, like what?
More
what's the
like
consequence?
a traffic accident coming out of the parking lot.
Because they had a food truck?
Because there was a business, a bandit business happening. Town has an onus to regulate traffic to care for the welfare of its inhabitants. We didn't do that. We couldn't do that because we don't have any ability to regulate food trucks.
Yeah, that was a weird spot too. That was before the traffic light was there, back before the traffic light.
I think the only question I have is this business about town-owned property, because I was actually thinking of that, and like now I could actually get a food truck to come to my birthday, like you can like get these things. for
Yeah.
my birthday party, and it's a different thing, but at the same time, I think, yeah, I would really love to be able to think about this and really say to, what do we also want? Because I would love to have a food truck. And I think the town would too, but I think we do need to have really thoughtful rules. I also was like, no more than 6 times in a calendar year. So some of this stuff seemed a little arbitrary. So I would like to just kind of think about that, but I so appreciate that it's so much easier to look at something and then think about it rather than a blank sheet of paper and then think about it.
Would-
So again.
For public safety, is it worth before we do a big discussion, just to pass something that says, like, if you bring a food truck into town, you need to let the code enforcement officer know, just so the town knows that this is happening, as opposed to just people showing up and not knowing?
But she doesn't have a code.
Well, that could be the code, is add into the code that you have to notify if you were doing some type of, okay. They don't want.
Yeah,
You're notifying me if there's a food truck in town, 'cause I want to go.
I'm backing up from the the warrant and the town meeting. Is it true we have to decide stuff tonight to get it on the warrant?
I think this merits a bigger discussion, and as has been said a couple times, this is something we're being proactive about. We don't need to try to hurry it to get
Okay.
done by June.
So in other words, it won't be on the warrant this year.
I think that's right, yeah. In contrast to LD 2003. Hopefully, these updates will be. Sam, can I give you the floor to discuss?
Yeah, so do people, I'm happy to walk through the statute if people find that helpful, or I'm happy to also open it up to questions at first. So, starting with some background, this will need to get placed on the warrant for this year. So in Pownell's case, this statute has really 3 elements. So the first one is the additional density bonus for affordable housing. The second piece is allowing multiple dwellings on a single lot where housing is allowed. And the third is allowing an ADU or accessory dwelling unit on a lot, on the same lot as a single family dwelling. So in Pownell's case, because the town doesn't have a growth area or public sewer and water, you can allow up to 2 dwelling units on a single lot with no existing housing. So this can be either 2 single-family homes, a single-family home and ADU, or 2 family dwellings. So a lot of this work was really just clarifying definitions, and that's the first piece. So the, took out a few definitions and really clarified the definition for ADU to be consistent with the state definition. The second piece of that is in section 504, where it's in zoning districts. So to have that second unit on a lot, you can't allow for more additional land area. So there, if your minimum lot size is 90,000 square feet, you can't have more land area for the second lot. So it either has to be the same or less. And then moved, some of the performance standards for ADUs were actually in the definition section. So those got moved to section 600. So those are the main changes.
So let me go back just one step. So if you allow a second dwelling on the same lot, you can't do more than double the 90,000 square foot requirement.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
that's why we've gone down to 150 there. Okay. All right, that clarifies.
But to clarify, like with the ADUs, you are still have to conform to other regulations like setbacks and septic and whatnot. So just because somebody had enough land to put an ADU, they may not have enough land to expand the septic system and they wouldn't be able to construct it.
Right now, we ask for separate septic systems, and I would like that to be very clear in the ordinances. Also, on grandfather clause, we need to have that stay in there. It had been placed that it would be removed because it was removed at a town meeting. But we really need that to stay in there because people think that we have a grandfather clause, and I need to show them, no, we do not.
Referring to definitions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So
But the septic systems.
the septic system needs to be part of the ADUs. So it's a requirement. And it just kind of clarifies everything. All right, thank you.
What were you saying about the grandfather clause?
In one of the suggestions of North Star was to remove the grandfather clause out of the definitions due to the fact, because it said we removed it in town meeting back in 2017, I believe. The fact is that everybody thinks we have a grandfather clause. I hear that probably 10 times a week, and it's very important that I'm able to say, I'm sorry, but we do not have a grandfather clause. And it's there for me in black and white.
You do not have a grant. What does that mean that we do not have a grandfather clause?
Say you had a food truck. And you'd been operating it for years in this one place, right? For example, and the zoning changed and you want to say, I'm grandfathered. I'm sorry, we don't have a grandfather clause.
Well, if we change the septic requirement for for just the entire town, let's say hypothetically, we change requirement. I mean.
That wasn't a
everybody-
change. I want it in there specific because it's already what we require.
Yeah.
So I just want it in black and white. That's what I need from these ordinances, is to have a little bit more clarity and not so much vague so that I'm getting constant, well, I can do this. Just like in the ADUs, what they want to know is it's 750 square feet livable space. Well, its definition is there, but it's not clear. Is it just livable space, or can we add a deck to that? Can we add a garage to that? Well, now you have two full houses at 750 square feet on a lot. Do you see why that's important? Okay.
Sorry, that's a separate issue. Can I make sure I understand the grandfather clause piece?
Uh-huh.
And I'm just being slow on this so in 2017, we struck the grandfather clause.
Because people used to say I'm grandfathered on that. Anything that was from the olden days, I'm
I
grandfathered.
get that, but then it stayed somehow in the ordinance and now the proposal is to strike it, or?
So one of the suggestions of North Star was because it was removed, we don't need it there. And yes, we do.
You're saying keep it.
Keep it
in
there, please.
Okay. I
Yes.
understand.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay. And is that just for this section or in general? Just the ADU section Okay. or definition? Well, it does bring up a question for me though, that like if we pass some rule, usually people do think there's some things are grandfathered. You know, like if we pass a rule saying your lot size needs to be X, Y, and Z, we're usually applying for a new thing as opposed to you're a non-conforming lot now and you somehow need to come up with more land or change your existing home.
There are certain things, Orion, that are very clear and that are very gray. So if you're looking at houses that only had to require 250 square feet, because back in the day, we only required 250 square feet, and their houses are there, where are they gonna get the extra to make it 300, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, or if you have other decisions that were solid and they're on paper and they're recorded.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. When we've already done that back in 2017, all I'm asking is that it doesn't get removed out of the book.
So that
So-
you can point to it and say, no, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no, we already did this. I say.
But
I only say no once, though.
All right, any questions for Sam on the LD 2003 updates?
Yes, Durham went through this in November of 2023. Now, they distinguish between vacant lots and developed lots, and they say developed lots, meaning if you already have a house there, must allow 3 dwelling units on any lot with a single family home. Can be one attached, one detached, or one of each, maximum of 3 units. Do you see anything that distinguishes between vacant lots and developed lots?
Not in Pownell's ordinance. This pertains to lots, any lots for residential housing is allowed.
Okay, according to this, and I can send it to you, if their town didn't pass their ordinance, the default from the state is that you could allow 3 units on the property.
Yeah, where there's, if you have a lot with 2 dwelling units, you can add, you can add an additional dwelling unit.
Up to 3.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
interesting.
So what's our procedure then? Do we need to approve this tonight in order to get it to public hearing and then get it on the warrant in time?
Get it through tonight so that it can be, have the language of the warrant.
Yep.
Done up so that it can get ready to post.
So Jenny, are you satisfied with what, so you've gotten the grandfather clause piece in there? Any other comments
Just
or?
clarity on the size of what those houses have to be. Are we gonna stay with the 750 square feet?
That's under, section 615 now, so it's 750 square feet, cannot exceed. for ADU.
Well, that says it cannot exceed.
Yes.
We don't have a minimum.
No, we don't, that's the next.
Where do, I know we're facing the tiny houses and cabins and so on, which we probably can't tackle tonight, but somehow we have to also get that together as well.
The tiny house piece?
Tiny house and this person who wanted to build cabins, which is, bigger than smaller than an ADU, but
Yeah,
bigger than, so.
yeah, I think we should add that to our list of
Of to-do
items.
list.
I think they're not gonna get done obviously by the June meeting.
We don't have a definition. Or
Okay. So sticking with LD 2003, I'd like a very minor item on page 3, Sam. Just strike the and after sheds and garages. And then you have and accessory dwelling units. We've gone through like an extensive process. Right after I joined the board, and Christine, you might have some recollection of this. The dwelling, accessory attached, accessory detached. I don't remember any of the context behind that. I just remember that it was a whole process. Is there anything we're missing or losing by striking this entirely? Oh, you haven't looked. I'm sorry. Okay, so the proposal is to strike dwelling accessory attached, dwelling accessory detached or unattached. Those are being struck, Sam, to comply with LD 2003 because it doesn't differentiate between those things, or?
It's really more for clarity. It's quite confusing to have several different definitions for accessory, for some form of accessory dwelling.
Right, right.
So to make it easier, we took the definition from the state.
Okay. As I see it, I don't have a problem with that. I just want to, I'm sort of anxious about overlooking something because I know that in the past, the board has gone through several iterations of this. We've never had an application where it mattered. It's never come up. I just want to make sure we're not. What's that?
Because it stays downstairs.
Yeah, exactly. It stays with the CEO. So do you have any thoughts on these? Do you have any concerns with striking the different versions of? I'm sorry, you don't have a copy of this, do you?
That's okay. I've read it.
Okay.
Just the fact that it's very clear, because I can see folks saying, now I can't have an accessory dwelling. Well, according to LD 2003, yes, we just eliminated what it's called because of LD 2003. Is that correct? Because you simplified it. You made it more clear in black and white. Okay. All right. So the only other thing I have is the minimum, because if you have a vacant lot, what are we going to consider a minimum house to be? And should it be less? That's my other question, less than the 750 that we're going to ask for another house. Because at one time in our old ordinance, wherever it went, we had a 600-foot minimum.
Can you, do you know where in the old ordinance that was mentioned? Because we worked on the recode from 21 and I didn't see anything.
It's from 2009. Okay, you didn't get it, Sam. It was removed. We do not know why it was removed. So, I do have language for that if, when you're ready after Sam.
Yeah, let's wrap the LD 2003 discussion then. Does anybody have any concerns with the other items that Sam has drafted here? Bill?
Just on page 3, it says, street frontage requirements, single, 2-family dwellings and accessory dwelling units, 300 feet. Is that like if you have a house right now, 300 feet of frontage, and you add an ADU, that ADU also has to have 300 feet?
Sorry, I might be alone in this, Bill, but I didn't follow. So you're on page 3.
Yes. Right at the top.
Okay.
This is, street frontage requirement.
Yeah, so it's the ADU.
I was like, I can't. believe
So the accessory dwelling unit would be on the same lot as a single family house. So it's, it would need to have 300 feet of frontage, both structures on the same,
Share the 300.
they're on the same lot. Yeah, so that's,
Just to kind of clarify, she's correct. It's on the same plot. And you might be recalling when we required 600 feet for a duplex. That is not the case. That's not what our ordinances say now. It says 300 feet. Okay, so you might be remembering that. I've had people ask.
So if I had 300 feet in my house, and I want to put an ADU out back. Is that cool? Like that 300? I don't know if that's 600.
yeah, that's right.
But if you had a house that was done previously, and maybe you only had 200 square feet of road frontage, you would not be allowed to put an ADU in because you don't have 300 square feet. Right? Which I'm fine with that. I just want to clarify that.
Well, that's what the board of appeals thinks.
I think that might be one of those cases where that was what it would be a lot that was legal back then.
Yeah.
And it falls under the parameters of where I would believe that for an ADU, where we got rid of the accessory dwelling and all of that, that yes, it would be allowed to have one.
You would allow them even though the law says you need 300. Yeah.
Okay. So Sam, do you want us to vote on this draft as you've got it here, this with the strike throughs and the additions? Okay. Does anyone have any further discussion before we make a motion? All right. I would move that we move forward to public hearing the Pownell Land Use Ordinance LD 2003 amendments, March 2024 as presented tonight. All in favor? All right, motion carries. Okay, since we started talking about minimum house height, can we go to that now?
All right.
So the ordinance used to read, any dwelling house shall have a minimum above ground level first floor area of 600 square feet. Manufactured housing must have a minimum of 750 square feet. So I guess that we would want a minimum, but I'm not definite on that 600 feet where we're only requiring 750 for the ADUs. You see what I'm saying? But that would be like on a vacant lot that we would require a minimum of a house lot size.
Is there a state statute on tiny houses?
There is, yes, there's a statute on tiny houses that it has to be 400 square feet or lower.
Okay, does
Mhm.
it require us to approve, like to have?
I think that there's some kind of a certification that they could go before the state to receive to get that.
Okay, and if they, but there's no requirement that municipalities allow them, provided they've,
I have, like, right now, I have no choice because we don't have an ordinance stating a minimum.
okay.
Yeah.
They do feed, like, you have to be able to cart them to the.
Well,
Well, no, this is just minimum. This is just small tiny houses on foundations. You see what I'm saying?
You have to transport them.
Right, but I also have houses where people just want to have 350 on a foundation. You see what I'm saying? They just,
Okay,
that's the problem.
can I just understand what's wrong with that?
Okay. So if you had a bunch of tiny houses in home, if you want to look at aesthetics, okay, and tax values, those types of things, okay. It has a number of other consequences. It's something that we have had in this town for a very long time, a minimum of a house lot. We never allowed it to be less than 600 square feet. I have a house where I have 440 square feet up on Allen Road. I was inundated with phone calls. So I want a minimum of a house lot of something so that I'm not getting inundated with, I thought our ordinance used to say. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's G2. So, and it's a philosophical issue that I don't think you want to deal with right now, but if you have a tiny house of 350 square feet, how do you assess that? Fairly for the rest of the people in the town, you're gonna assess it on square footage, or if that tiny house has 4 children. There's another question about public safety. A house of 350 square feet will not pass any fire code. Now, the state has overlooked that and said, caveat emptor. So there are so many municipal issues wrapped around this thing, and I think it's really important that the board educate themselves on really what this certified tiny house is and does for the tax assessment value in the town. So, well,
I'm having trouble separating the tiny house, which is what all the buzz is about, versus just a small house, which is what this ordinance is about. What's the smallest we should allow for a family to live in? We don't want to necessarily eliminate people wanting to buy a small house. Is that 600 feet? I don't know what the number is. But I agree, there should be a number that just.
well, there is, so I'm looking at something, the main state rules of what, basically is certified as a tiny home by the state. and it must pass American National Standard Institute on plumbing, propane, fire, life safety, and construction of National Fire Protection Association. So there, sounds like there is some state requirements regarding safety and
Yeah.
fire. And so, you know, I look at this, I mean, I get where the CEO is coming from. My thought is, you know, we could have a 600 square feet minimum, basically, unless this, you know, unless you have a tiny home that is certified by the state of Maine and meets the ANSI standards, and then, you know, people, that potentially addresses the safety concerns. And
Can I make a proposal on that? So I think I'm hearing urgency from you. You've had Jenny, sorry, you've had folks calling and concerned about this. Apparently it used to be in our ordinance and there was some clerical mistake and it wasn't intentionally removed. So you're saying, let's get it back in. I'd be open to having sort of more discussion about whether it makes sense to be 750 square feet. My personal view is it seems like less of an impact on the land, less energy use typically, like there's a lot of benefit that could come with this, provided that the public safety pieces are there, and if there's no inequity in the assessment. But those are big provisions that probably involve a larger discussion. So I think what you're saying, Ginny, is can you guys just pass this so that we get back to where we were, right? And then if we want to have a bigger discussion about it, we can down the line. It doesn't seem like it's like a burning issue in town, but it is enough of a burning issue for you that you're getting phone calls from some folks. But if we have time to address it in the future, we can, after we do what we're being asked. Does that make sense?
it makes sense. I still, if we're adding in the thing about 600-foot minimum, why not mention the 400-foot thing? And then we can go back and fix that later if we want to, as opposed to disallowing something that the state certifies as safe and then coming back and adding it in.
In reading 1981 too, there seems to be a difference between a tiny home that is movable and transportable and a tiny home that is on a foundation. So this law seems to be about something that is a vehicle without motive power. So that's in this, and that's the 400, that's the 400 square feet one, whereas something built on a foundation seems a little bit different. So maybe we can make a distinction between those two.
And I have a secondary question with just the wording here. That it says, any dwelling shall basically have first floor area of 600 square feet. But then it has a second line that manufactured housing must have a minimum 750 square feet. And I understand in the past, people had a negative impression of manufactured housing and maybe they wanted a different requirement for manufactured housing, but there's manufactured housing that is high quality and affordable. And so if we allow a different type of home to have 600 square feet, why are we having different square footage for manufactured home?
I can't tell you when that ordinance was drafted originally. And even though it says I put that exactly how it was, I do not necessarily think it should be at 600 feet. I think it should be at where the ADUs are going to be at 750. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't think, right, there's no distinction.
The ADU is the maximum of 750.
Right, and then we also have a minimum. So
Right,
if you
but-
want your ADU,
Then we're saying the ADU, like, there's only one size ADU you can do because it has to be exactly 750 square feet. And if it's 749, we're not gonna allow
no,
an ADU to be built.
a maximum ADU. It doesn't say a
No,
minimum.
But you're saying.
I'm
you
saying a
want
minimum of a residential, the first home.
Once it's reinstated, then you have.
I think that's the right approach is I think there's lots of good reasons to discuss the tiny home or different variances of that. It's very consistent with affordable housing, low energy use that like I want to have a discussion around this. But I think Ginny's point is really limited. This was omitted clerically. It wasn't supposed to be. Let's get it back in there. I just don't understand the piece. And if we now have an ADU requirement that it's no more than 750 feet. So does that, as it's drafted, any dwelling house?
You want that to say 600, I just wrote it exactly as it was written, okay, in the 2009,
Okay,
and that's exactly. You want to change the footage. I am not opposed to that, I just want it to be clear.
But, well, my clarification is that if we're saying any dwelling house, then that includes ADUs. So we're putting a minimum square footage for an ADU as well.
on the first floor too. So it's got to be 600 feet first floor. I just want to make sure we get the drafting right so that we don't screw over people when they get their ADU, right? So I'm thinking about this. So help me out here, guys. So the way, so now we've got a requirement that ADUs not be more than 750 feet total, not first floor total, right? We've got to figure out a way to draft this to have a minimum square footage. Could it just be any dwelling unit shall have a minimum square footage of 600 feet? Or shall have a minimum of 600 square feet? Would that be okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I'm wondering, since dwelling house is not in the definition, dwelling is, would put that minimum size right in the definitions, or? I'm looking at Jenny's answer.
I'm sorry,
So there's in the definitions, there's no dwelling house, but there's dwelling. Would we put the minimum size in that definition?
yeah, and it could probably. Yeah, I think that would be fine.
So that would go in the definition of accessory dwelling unit?
First one is dwelling.
No.
This vision was written before it got redone. This is a provision for a main house. Okay, so well, or to have and the accessory dwelling definition. This is, you see that. You have to get it back in the book and then you can split it.
Okay. Okay. So Sam, can you add to the amendments that you're proposing to the definitions, this change to the dwelling definition so that it be a minimum of 600 feet? And or do you want it to include 600 feet on the first floor? Or should it?
Whatever it says there.
And there's manufactured housing is another.
That,
Can't change what's there.
Right.
What's there. Then, once it gets approved, then you can't amend.
Okay.
Well,
It's a clerical error, but it's inconsistent with what's been changed to get to the ADU. So we're putting a clerical error in there.
yeah,
That is going to be inconsistent with what we're proposing. So I don't mean to be sort of stubborn about this, but I don't want to put in something that doesn't make any sense because it's inconsistent with changes that are happening in this draft.
yeah, if like what Matt is saying, if you keep in the above ground level first floor area, part of that, then like if the ADU itself is, I don't know, yeah, like how does that impact the ADU basically? That limits what kind of ADUs you can do.
So maybe the right way to approach this is just to say any dwelling So we're stopping at dwelling. Shall have a minimum
Floor area of 600 square feet.
floor area of 600 square feet. And then for the manufactured housing piece, we can include that in the definitions as well. For manufactured housing. Would that be okay, Jenny? Okay.
And we can still say it was a clerical error.
So
Yeah,
the manufactured housing definition, where is,
We
Ah.
have a minimum on manufacturing
oh, okay, we do.
already.
okay,
All right.
okay.
Oh, yes, I was like, yeah.
So-
Do you want to take a copy? Yeah. Oh, she doesn't want to do the manufacturing home is okay.
So I have a clarifying question. You keep bringing up ADUs, but does this apply to ADUs or does this just apply to the
If,
To the original
main
dwelling.
house?
if we put it under dwelling, I would think it applies to all dwellings,
To
including
any dwelling? So
ADUs.
You're
Yeah.
you're clumping it into any livable, whatever we want to
Yeah.
call it. Okay,
Can I see?
yeah.
That includes ADUs.
Okay. And so, this is saying, a minimum of 600 feet on the first floor, but an ADU is
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
750
That's-
total.
That's what my concern was. I think we've gotten around that at this
Okay.
point by saying, any dwelling shall have a minimum above ground level floor area. So it's not just the first floor area of 600 square. feet.
Well, I thought we were gonna
That's
say
gonna
just
say-
any dwelling shall have a minimum floor area of 600 square feet. Then it doesn't matter if it's above ground or not. The
Okay.
dwelling is 600 square feet.
But what
And
you're
we-
doing is you're significantly decreasing the square footage if you're applying that to both a first floor and a second floor.
Yeah,
Significantly by half. So that's gonna really shrink. So is the minimum house size that we're concerned about? Is that first floor minimum size?
yeah.
Or is it just the total square footage that's significant? Because that's a huge difference.
Well, my concern is like, if you have an ADU, if it's a basement ADU or a garage ADU, how does the whole ground floor level 600 feet requirement?
I think given
be
that we're
affected by it?
sort of correcting a clerical error, I think we should keep this as close to the previous ordinance as possible. And then we can have these broader discussions, which I'm in favor of. But let's just try to do the minimum required to like make it consistent with the changes that have happened since 2009. But also align with what was in place.
But what I think there's a legitimate question with the ADU above a
Wait,
garage.
It just went like that to me. Can you tell me what you mean, Christine?
Yeah,
I don't think you were threatening me.
Beating a dead horse. All that Jenny requested was to put in the original. So stop with the questions and let's get it on the board to vote on what you have. And then after it is passed by the town, you can go
Yeah.
back and have your bigger discussions on
Yeah,
how
I-
we're going to define these.
I appreciate that, Christine. I know that we've talked about this at some length.
I
I want to
have,
make sure I clarify why that is, okay? We're also making a change to require a maximum square footage of all ADUs, okay? Dwelling, as it's defined in our ordinance, includes ADUs, okay? So we're doing this to avoid the very crazy situation of having a requirement of all above ground level first floor area of 600 feet. That would mean that you could have essentially one level for all ADUs. And only ADUs that are between 600 and 750 square feet, which doesn't seem like the goal of the 2009 piece. And it's like, it's a crazy So I'm trying to make sure we don't have that crazy outcome. It's taken some discussion. So I apologize that you've had to listen to it, but we're gonna try to get it right. So can I make a proposal?
Yeah.
That we just have, any dwelling shall have a minimum above ground level floor area of 600 square feet.
So you're getting rid of the first.
That's right.
All right, that.
And I'm
that
getting rid
gets
of dwelling house because dwelling house doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything. Okay, so I'm gonna make a motion that that Sam includes in these updated definitions. And move forward to a public hearing, the inclusion of a requirement that any dwelling shall have a minimum above ground level floor area of 600 square feet.
Above ground floor. That's not first floor.
That's right. It's not first floor.
Because if you were to garage ADU, it wouldn't be on the first floor, right? So if you had
It's
a
above ground
600
level.
I know, I'm saying if you said first floor, we would be eliminating potentially above ground garage, because the, no, would that still?
House, a residence,
But isn't an ADU a house and a residence?
or not.
Yes, it is. If the definition of dwelling is.
Dwelling includes ADUs is how we're
ADUs, you have
interpreting
to-
this.
Don't you have to include that?
Yeah. Unless we're getting a separate minimum for ADUs.
Right. And then that would be under a different definition. I'm getting confused.
Dan, could you please explain the definition of ADU? Is there maybe?
So the proposed definition states a self-contained dwelling unit located within, attached to, or detached from a single-family dwelling unit located on the same parcel of land. An accessory dwelling unit shall be designed and equipped so that it can be occupied by a person or persons living independently from the person occupying the principal single-family dwelling.
We're talking about the definition of just the word dwelling,
It
which is
doesn't-
where we want to put
It doesn't
this
have
line.
ADU.
Dwelling?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
you
but
could-
I
you
think
could
it
read it
dwelling
as
includes ADU, the way it's written, the way it's drafted.
Even though they have. Even though we have another
Different definition for an
definition
accessory dwelling unit.
for an accessory dwelling unit.
I think that's right, because dwelling includes anything that is a dwelling, right?
How
If you
would,
read the definition of dwelling, it's sort of, it's inclusive.
So it's a building designed or used as a living quarters for one or more families. The term shall not be deemed to include inn or bed and breakfast or rooming house or temporary trailer. It shall include manufactured housing as defined in the zoning ordinance unless specifically included. It shall be attached to an approved foundation. Any axles, wheels, or tires for transportation shall be removed.
So I think that includes ADUs.
what if we,
Can we make it not include ADUs?
Yeah. what if we had the language about the first floor under dwelling, and then the ADU section, we clarify that there's a minimum of 600 square feet, but that doesn't have to be on a single floor. What about if you instead of on the first floor, saying something about a single floor, right? Because then it could be at the above garage. One floor has to be 600 square feet. I know, that's what we're trying to do, the same minimum.
Yeah. So can we just do this? Can I just, sorry, I don't understand what's wrong with the language that I proposed. I don't mean to be stubborn. I'm just trying to get this discussion sort of finished.
I'm throwing it out there because you're essentially having the size of if you're putting it, if you can say, if we're sticking to what the original zoning, the original ordinance was, they're talking about 600 feet on a first floor. So if you had a two-story house, that would actually be a 1,200 square foot home, which has a much, which has a bigger footprint. It's a bigger house than if you said 600
It could be
feet.
300 and 300.
Right,
Yeah.
and so you're now having the size
I see.
of the footprint of the house. And so what is really important about the original ordinance, the way I read it, is that it's a minimum square footage of the entire first floor of the house. And if you make it 600 feet total, you're making a new ordinance.
Yeah. And then we are also saying essentially all ADUs have to be one floor.
Well, that's something different.
That's de facto
altogether.
what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we good then with changing it? Subject to that, we include the first floor. So we're effectively just striking house from this and including it as is. Is everybody okay with that? Big silence. Yes.
I just have one. What if we did what you said, but we just had a clarifying line that like, if the dwelling is an ADU that is not on the first floor, that like it's 600 square, like that we allowed ADUs not to be on the first floor, basically, somewhere in the thing. So just clarifying that just because we're saying it makes sense to say the first floor area, like as long as you're defining like the ADU might not be on the first floor, but 600 square feet, as opposed to this saying you can't build
Yeah.
something that's not on the first floor.
I think we should address that. I think we have a lot to address in this, and I think we've kind of beaten a dead horse, so let's do it subject to Todd's change. I
Yeah.
agree that's an issue. I'm worried that.
Yeah, I agree.
Could we read?
All right, so I move that the following ordinance be moved forward to a public hearing. Any dwelling shall have a minimum above ground level first floor area of 600 square feet.
Would you want to add, sorry,
We're gonna get there,
I know. But maybe to help with the problem, of a garage on the first floor, is just the first floor of living space. Would that matter? Would that help? Does that complicate it? Does that make a difference?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
I do not want to prolong this. It seems to me that in the proposed definition of accessory dwelling unit, we're referencing the principal single-family dwelling. And I think the definition of dwelling might be the principal single-family dwelling. So it would not include ADUs.
I think Jenny's saying we need to have a minimum size for ADUs as well.
Right, but now we're talking about the dwelling thing. So I wouldn't worry about, I guess I wouldn't worry about writing in dwelling stuff. I would put that in the ADU definition. I wouldn't mess that up with the dwelling definition. Huh?
They're separate entities. Your
Yeah.
home is, you can't have an ADU.
Right,
Until you have that minimum requirement.
right,
for-
exactly.
It's
So-
separate units.
So
Yes,
are you agreeing with me?
yes.
Oh, okay. So that's why I wouldn't put in the garage thing in dwelling, because that's your principal single-family dwelling, and we can put the minimum on the ADU in the ADU definition.
Okay,
So I wouldn't mix up those
but I
two
think
things.
Jenny's saying the problem isn't just with ADUs, it's with other houses as well.
Right, that's the dwelling.
Okay,
That's the dwelling, so let's put a minimum on there, the 600.
okay.
I do know people that
Yeah.
have, that live in a house with, the first floor is a garage.
Oh, it's literally their
It is
house.
Literally their
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
Is that the ground level first floor area?
What's that?
Is that the ground level first floor?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is
So,
it 600 feet?
probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why you're adding the living space.
Is it
When-
grandfathered?
What's that? Yeah. Probably, yeah, it's gotta be. It was built like 10 years ago, maybe.
Oh,
The Schultzes.
There's that
Could
house
tell
on
it's
Elmwood.
close to 8 o'clock. Yeah.
All right, so I think we've got consensus here. I'm gonna make the fifth motion, I think, to adopt language that any dwelling shall have a minimum of above ground level first floor of living space area of 600 square feet. Someone second it.
I second.
All in favor? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know that required patience.
I think we got it.
Okay.
Solar.
Solar farm standard. We've also got site plan review updates. Was it the vision, was it is the vision that we will accomplish solar standards and site plan review updates in time for the June town meeting? Is that the goal?
What we can do.
I think the goal is, with solar at least, I think this is gonna take a few rounds of revisions.
Yeah.
And considering the time frame, I don't think it's realistic to have it on the warrant for this year. I think Tom can feel free to add his thoughts on the site plan.
Well, a little bit on solar. I'd like to say what I said at the last meeting, and I'd like it to be in the record. Solar developments are viewed in different ways, okay? I tend to be more of a futuristic type of planner, and so I'm looking down the road what this community is going to look like 20 and 30 years from now when you have an abandoned solar farm. There's going to be many of them. And so someone has to put it on the table as a forewarning. Life expectancy is typically 20 to 30 years. 30 years, you're lucky. 2025, it's going to require immense performance bonding because if developers go south, and some do, if solar companies go south, and some do, your town is left with an abandoned solar farm. So that's absent in the first draft. And as Sam has said, it's going to require multiple drafts. So that's one precautionary thing that I think is going to take meeting and meeting and meeting so that we can refine it to the point, be satisfied with a good solar development if one does come, but also be realistic that 20 and 25 years from now, there's going to be issues in disposal of the abandoned solar panels, which are toxic. Most of those are made outside the country. And for those of us that have dissected solar panels, we know what's inside them. So thus, ergo, there's a responsibility on the part of a community. It's not like abandoning or getting rid of a solar panel or two on your house. I come from a community that has the largest solar farm in the nation. And it's on leased property. There's a reason they're leasing it and not having it fee simple. Because after 20 or 25 years, there'll be new technologies. The size of the panels will be the size of a quarter. So we have to be, I think, very thoughtful about creating those types of ordinances that on the surface give many energy benefits. But in the future, we need to have very, very, and I'd be happy to, Sam has worked hard putting together that first draft on that component that I'm trying to express very sincerely how much of a concern it will be, not only here, but in other places, that we take a good close look at that part too. On site plan review, that it also is a fairly overwhelming task to revamp. It needs a revamping. However, there might be an opportunity to do something I think that the board would very much appreciate. And it's to form, and I'm going to talk with the select board about this, a small committee of town officials, ergo, the fire chief, the head of public works, the town planner, and the code enforcement officer. Typically, communities like yours and larger will have a committee that will do the preliminary research as a site plan review committee, the legwork, some of the grunt work, some of the things that would be helpful if you had the fire chief at every meeting. He's not going to be here at every meeting. And what typically happens is a site plan review is looked at. Some of the things that would be spotted by a fire chief or DPW or a DOT curb cut, all those things would be sort of advanced reviewed, and that committee would submit it to the planning board that has the voting authority. No voting authority with the committee. It's more doing the homework, if you will, and saving you time that you could invest in the solar ordinance.
Wait, so are you talking, just to be clear, you're not talking about once the site plan review ordinance is in place, here's the procedures, it would go before a committee that would take an initial look. Maybe that's the case. You're just talking about actually drafting the site plan review ordinance.
Ultimately, I think this would be 1/20th of some of the improvements that needs to be made, but probably the most handy. Just in a couple of paragraphs, the purpose of having that committee and who's on the committee and how their findings report back to the full planning board. It's been used, I can think, Jesus, far back as the 80s. And it would be a very helpful tool for you to have as a time saver.
Yeah.
And it picked.
I agree, Tom. I think we've only had a few site plan
Yes.
applications come through. And in each of them, I felt like it was so technical that the board was just sort of reviewing submission requirements and not really doing more. The one sort of caveat that's just kind of a bug for me is that I think we need to expand what requires site plan review. I think with the greenhouse application, very large greenhouse, like 30,000 square feet or something huge. And it was only required that we review like the pump house. And that just seems like a problem. I think the idea was greenhouses are agricultural, so like someone could have a greenhouse in their yard and that doesn't require site plan review. But I think there's got to be sort of a scale piece. But I like the vision of having a sort of committee to do the initial review. And then we get to, take a look at some of those discretionary pieces after that.
And let me address both points. If that's something that the board would like, I can generate that on the way home. It's pretty easy language. It's just the formation and it's procedural. If it's something you'd like to implement at this town meeting. If it's not, then we can take a look at that plus the larger whole bulk of the entire site plan review. As to your other point, many communities will define what's very much like your subdivisions, what's a minor development and what's a major development. Unfortunately, we'll be forced into defining that by square footage. Most of the communities in this area, anything from 2,000 to 3,000 square feet, considered minor. Everything else, major, with different performance standards for each, different review criteria. But that's probably the way that we'd have to tackle it. I think you'll be seeing more site plan reviews in the future. And so I'm just trying to think of a thoughtful way that staff can do some of the homework, define some of the conditions, and then have the board say a, nay, or even expand them. So it's a thoughtful approach to site plan review. Even though you haven't had many in the past, I anticipate there'll be more in the future.
I have a follow-up question about the solar piece. I agree that, you know, it's gonna take time to craft smart legislation. And in the meantime that it takes time to craft it, what is our existing rules now? And if someone comes along right now, before we have an updated solar thing, is there, you know, if we're concerned that, oh, this is on a farmland and not a good location, is there anything in the current rules that we can say, no?
You have basically no criterion at all that speaks to the specifics of solar farm development, but you do have site plan review. And in site plan review, there's enough gray area to expand your interpretation with a developer's interpretation of what a development is. That's all I can say now. But, and that's one of the difficulties with the site plan review. I like black and white ordinances. Gray ones can help you on occasion, depending on what side of the fence you're sitting on. But there's very, very little criterion. Solar farms are complicated. They require complicated review. And unfortunately, I think many municipalities have been looking at it in a very superficial way. Take a look at, as you drive to Augusta, with solar panels in the cloverleaf. I'm not sure who did the site plan on that one or the review.
We did, it disbanded. And this raises a broader question for me, and John's not here anymore, but sort of what is the scope of our role? Right now, we don't have a ton of applications coming in, but I know there was a period of time last year where we couldn't balance all the different things that were being put on us. And right now, there's a lot. Now, that having been said, I think Tom is saying there's a lot of folks here who can work on this at a professional level and kind of give us we give them guidance and we kind of review, but it's not as though we're going to be holding workshops regularly to draft it ourselves. So I'm comfortable handling, well, I'm saying this on my own, I'd welcome comment on it. I'm comfortable handling the solar farm and site plan updates, provided that it's just sort of reviewing and giving feedback and sort of working iteratively with Tom and Sam and maybe some subcommittee of others, the fire chief, public works, that sort of thing. That's fine by me. Are others comfortable with that? I don't think it'll be extensive additional work for us. And I think we've kind of agreed on it at the last couple of meetings.
Yeah, I mean, if we created a new committee, I don't know how they would necessarily come up with a better answer than us. Working with Tom, of course.
Do we table the site plan revisions that we have on our hand, or do we try to get?
I'm inclined to table them tonight. I think they're broader discussions that we have to have. Tom, do you think we should try to get these through, the changes that are here through for town meeting in June? I don't think that's realistic.
Which ones do you have?
I don't have the site plan review in front of me right now. I have the memo, but not the actual changes.
Why don't we leave it this way? If the board feels that they would like to make one fairly easy thing to put in, that's the creation of a committee composed of, I'm trying to think of the language, composed of roads, planning, highway department, and fire chief. Typically, there's also law enforcement that's involved, but in the absence of that, on bigger applications, typically in the past, we involved the local sheriff that legal enforcement, law enforcement context. That could be created on one page and inserted if you wanted to do that one step. Conversely, we can take and do one complete overhaul of the town meeting in June of 25. It's the board's call.
Don't we already kind of engage with all those people in permit
but I
review
think Tom's
process.
talking about a more formalized item,
Okay.
and I think that makes sense. I don't think we can figure out that language tonight. And I think it's got to go forward to the public hearing. That sounds like it's going to be kind of a comprehensive, public hearing.
How about we compromise? I could send the language to Marcia. She can filter it. We can look at it as part and parcel of next year. But this, again, is sort of a stage setter for the many things that probably should be done to site plan review. to
Okay.
make it, more efficient.
Okay,
And so let's just use that as a dress rehearsal, if you will.
great.
And, but I'd like to send it out because it's, again, it's on my mind, I want to clear my mind. And then you can be thinking about it. In the interim, we could take that concept and I'm gonna run it upstairs to the select board to see if we can kind of informally create something like that. And if a site plan or two comes across, then we can test drive it. And then that'll help us maybe refine that. So I'll make that promise to you that's the concept.
That's great. And then can I propose that next month's meeting, we focus on one of these two so we can kind of really get after it? I'm fine with either solar or site plan review. I'll just throw out there, I think site plan review is a little bit more urgent, so. I propose
Agreed.
That be the item for the April meeting.
I was just checking, I actually didn't send out originally, sorry, but
Yeah, okay.
I put it on the agenda, but I'm looking through. Because I just, I think it was an intention, but not.
Okay. Okay. So we've got a plan for the April meeting. Do we have any applications in for the April meeting? Do we know, Marcia or
What
Tom?
happened to the vote on the Board of Appeals on the referendum?
My understanding is the applicant asked to table the discussion. Because it was unclear. There was just a lot of lack of clarity around whether it was an administrative review or a miscellaneous, administrative appeal and miscellaneous appeal. So, you know, for us, the next step is we would either get an application or get something from the Board of Appeals. I know the applicant has expressed concern about sort of lack of clarity up from the town and lack of transparency. So I want to make sure that we're extra cautious about not talking about the substance of it. So the next item would just be an application.
I was just asking for the agenda.
Yeah, it sounds to me, based on what I watched on the meeting, like it's gonna be possibly coming before us, or they might go back before the board.
Matt, I have a quick question, not wanting to prolong this meeting any longer than necessary. But with Tom's concern about solar, and I agree, I think prioritizing the submissions and that needs to happen first, but the definitions for solar farms, that's pretty simple. Do we just want to knock that out? and
Yeah.
Get that so it can go before the town?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's gonna. Oh, I see what you mean.
Just the definite, like, we don't even currently
The
have,
definitions we have out here today, yeah. I don't know that they will. That it will do anything to have the definitions.
no, but it was something we had talked about at the last meeting.
Yeah, I don't know, what do folks think? Should we vote on these definitions tonight? I don't know that it's gonna move the ball at all, because we don't have any review criteria. So, okay.
Yeah.
Happy to not vote on.
Okay. All right, so the planning board procedures 2022 and welcome to the planning board. Can I propose we push that one more month to next month? Is that okay? And then,
I'll raise with the annual report.
are you okay doing that?
Yeah,
Okay,
and I'll send it to you too.
okay. Thank you, Marcia. All right, any other
And then
business?
the checklist. They're still out there.
Yeah, so do you want me to just contact Becky and ask her to take them off the website? Is that the
I think that would be,
next step? Okay,
and then we still need to do them.
Yeah. All right, so in terms of checklists, Sam, we have the existing checklists, which are no longer, they don't make any sense anymore. Can you run a first draft of a checklist that would be sort of similar to what you have done in the past? In terms of pre-meeting memoranda, only sort of more generalized, and just list out every item that needs to be submitted. And the goal of that is for us to be able to do sort of a completeness review to know the application is complete, they've submitted all of the necessary items. And it would be revised based on the RECOD and the conservation subdivision. Thank you.
So you want two checklists, the one for conservation subdivisions and then one for site plan review drafted up.
I think there would also be a minor subdivision checklist. That shouldn't be changed significantly. It'll just be changed compared to the recodification so that we have any,
Okay.
yeah, Tom.
If I may make a suggestion to the board, on the generalized checklist, Marcia and Sam will work together on those. And if Sam, can create, I would suggest the highest priority checklist is the conservation one, because there's a complete absence of any checklist on it. And, it's my anticipation that there may be a conservation subdivision coming in 2024. So it would be good to prepare for that, and have it ready in advance, so that procedurally, we have it right in front of us. Also, that when I do my initial conceptual review, of a conservation subdivision, that onus for the ordinance falls on me. I want to get it picture perfect. So I want this first one to be your poster child, conservation subdivision.
Excellent.
We put a lot of time into it. It's very complex. It has a lot of details. And we want to get it right. So I suggest if it works with your timelines and that if the board approves, we make that the highest priority.
Great.
Prepare.
Can I, just one observation on that, and this isn't really apropos of the checklist, it's more, I really want to make sure that we're transparent with applicants from the get-go, that we are likely going to ask them to pay for a third-party consultant to sort of review items. So I want to make sure that we don't sort of spring that on applicants. In the past, the one time that we sort of did that, we did it at like the second or third meeting, and they were like, well, we're almost done. What's the, and I just want to make sure that in the initial application, like right when it first gets proposed, we're clear to them, you know, it's very likely that the board will require a third-party consultant.
Thank you for bringing that up. What I had mentioned earlier about peer review, in the very near future, peer review will be absolutely necessary because it might be a sign that none of us have seen it. But I appreciate you bringing it up, Matt, because I think it has to be a two-step process now, given the shortness of time. I don't believe that unless we bring it to a public hearing next month, it's only going to be a paragraph or so that speaks to peer review. But I think there's a way of achieving that. And Monday I'll be speaking with the select board about adjusting their fee schedules. And in that fee schedule, I'm going to propose to them as step one, peer review and what the cost. So, and because the select board is empowered to, the only one empowered to do that fee schedule update, that's where we'll start. And then I think we'll want to dovetail it into the land use ordinance. This is very precise.
Okay. I mean, just, I'm 99% sure the conservation subdivision ordinance has a provision in there that the applicant may be required to pay for a peer review. So I think we've already got it in there.
There's a
Dave.
reference in that one, but in other applications that come forward,
Yeah,
you know, at 1.3 months ago, there was the firm in California that wanted to do a large battery up. That would have required a special scientist in that review process.
right.
And, so peer review is critical. Most of your sister communities have it in order. Many of them don't have it in the proper legal language, but they have it there. And it's been, I think, accepted by almost all of them. That's part of it.
Yep. Okay.
So, be aware that I will be bringing that forward. to select board.
Okay. Excellent. With our full support, I think.
You're the longest I can say now, the lighting board's behind me now.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, we are. The select board doesn't do anything without our approvals. All right, with that, any further items for discussion?
I'd like to thank our staff, our planning director, our CEO for the boots on the ground work they do, navigating these policies and identifying where there's gray areas and questions that need to be addressed, and encourage you to continue bringing these forward so that we can make the job easier for you, hopefully, or more clarity for you.
And put you through 3-hour meetings. Once that changes. Th-
Been here since 7:30.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Sam. You guys have done a mountain of work. We appreciate it. All right, we adjourn.